after the talk or tomorrow.
Yeah.
I do have mouthpieces and reeds, but I don't want to facilitate that for you now.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, all right. Hey, you want some, here, you can pass these back so newcomers can, Jacques,
Yes.
pass those back.
Okay.
Wow. That's good, but, I mean, it'll just get in the way, right? Okay, let me see if I got everything I need here. Well, thanks for coming. I'm like pretty impressed. Alright, so it's called How the Saxophone Works, or no, Saxophone Mechanics and Saxophone Mystique. I'm going to do my best to get to both. Alright, first we'll do mechanics, then we'll get to Mystique. Alright, and there's a lot to cover there. But, so I'll just start with a little demo here. Alright. Hang on a second.
I was playing trio with Georgia and Henry on that song the other day. Two saxes and then drums. Good instrumentation.
Okay, I'm back. I just don't want to have to shout. Right, when I'm shouting, it doesn't feel natural. Because I only yell when I'm talking to my kids. So, here we go, right? Oh, did you get a thing? Yeah, you're welcome. Alright, we get the idea. Yeah, can you practice in another room? Because we're going to talk.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks. What's that?
Yeah. People used to do it with a piece of grass.
That's what this is. I just went outside and plucked it off the ground. So, we'll come back to that. Welcome. He's just far enough away so it's perfect, you know? You get the idea. Come on in. Everybody have a seat.
Isn't cane considered a species of grass?
Correct. Pass those back, Jacques. Yes. Cane is part of the grass family. They are the same thing. All right, if we were biologists, we would say they're the same. you guys didn't hear me come. No one came to Centrum to hear me play, but you get the idea. So, right, saxophone mechanics, saxophone mystique. How does the saxophone work? So, when I am using just the piece of grass, I hold the grass firmly between my thumbs so it can't move, and I exert pressure on it with my breath, which forces it to vibrate. Because it's held firmly between my thumbs, it oscillates back and forth, which moves the air around it, creating sound waves. The vibrations create sound waves that we hear. And this is at its most basic level, this is how the saxophone works, right? At its most basic level. We've just sort of covered it all. We could finish the talk now, but that would be totally disappointing. So, the next step is with this. So now, as Doug so appropriately pointed out, this is a piece of grass. The cut of the grass is more advanced than this one. I just went out and plucked this off the ground. There was really no thought put into it. But a lot of thought was put in how to cut this piece of grass. And there was a lot of thought in how to hold it firmly. So we've got something a little more advanced than my thumbs, actually a lot more advanced. But nonetheless, it's all in the interest of making the vibration of the grass something that we can manipulate more. I don't really have a way to manipulate this very much. We get what we hear. But with this, if you're good enough, you can probably play a whole scale on one of these. I'm not that good a saxophonist, so I can get, half a scale if I'm lucky. But the ability to manipulate the sound wave that is produced by the vibrational wave, the sound wave that's produced by the reed, is much greater with this. And the way that's done is by tightening your embouchure on the reed so that you shorten the amount of the reed that's vibrating, and the pitch goes up because you're shortening the sound wave. You shorten the sound wave, the pitch goes up. You lengthen the sound wave, the pitch goes down. Right? When I put the mouthpiece on the saxophone, we have quite a different scenario now, because now the vibrating piece of grass has been attached to a resonator, an amplifier. And the sound wave is much, much longer now. It fills the entire resonator all the way through to the end. Actually, it kind of comes out a little bit beyond and it goes back in. But so it's filled the entire resonator, and now I have a much greater ability to manipulate the sound wave. And there's two ways that we do that. What I did was play some notes, but I also made sure that I played a bit of the harmonic series. So one way to manipulate the sound wave with this and a vibrating piece of grass is to exert more pressure on the reed, which multiplies the amount of vibrations. So even if this thing didn't have any keys on it, and it was just a tube, and it was just essentially it's still a resonator, but if it was a more crude resonator, you would hear the first harmonic, because you would double the amount of vibrations. You could exert more pressure on the reed after that, and you can hear more of the harmonic series. So we're manipulating the sound wave, but we're not making it any shorter. It's still as long as the resonator, it's just vibrating, you're multiplying the amount of vibrations. There's another way to manipulate the sound wave, and that is since we're limited to how long the sound wave can be because it's limited to the length of the resonator, the only thing we can do is make it shorter. And the way you make it shorter is by putting holes in it. So now's a good time to look at some of your visual aids. Does everyone have visual aids? Did you get a visual aid, Ian?
Looking over.
I got extras, so you might as well take your own. Oh, you didn't get one. Here. Oh. Tell me your name again.
Nancy.
Nancy, right. Here you go.
Thank
Everybody else got one? Okay. So, if you look at what was I saying? So we can't make the thing longer. Well, you could make it longer, but once you're playing it, you can't make it longer. So we put holes in it. And a good place to start is with visual number 3. I guess it's okay, right? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I mean, we're at a jazz camp. It's not like I can tell everyone to not play the horns. We'll just do the best that we can. So, if you put holes in the resonator, as they are in the little tiny picture on the bottom left is a shawm, right? I mean, what's a bombard? But essentially, it's a shawm. We've got a double reed instrument with basically a simple resonator with just holes in it. But it's still essentially this. We've got a vibrating piece of brass connected to the resonator, and now and when you exert pressure on it, the resonator translates, carries, fills. The resonator is filled with the sound wave, and then you can manipulate it by opening the holes consecutively. Because once you put holes in it, if you've covered all the holes with your fingers, when you lift up your first finger, the sound wave will come out of the first available open hole. When there are no holes, the sound wave comes out of the end. As soon as there are holes and you've covered them all, as you open the first one, the sound comes out of that, right? So, 1 second. When you have them all closed, this is the B flat tone hole. Everyone here a saxophonist? Okay, so B flat comes out of here. B comes out of here. We call this B flat key. We call this B flat tone hole. But technically, this is the B tone hole because that is the hole out of which it comes. Did you have a question?
Yeah. How would one discern the distance at which to put the holes?
That is a great question, and I'm not going to answer it because that is a question for an acoustician or an engineer of saxophones. And if I tried to answer it, I would be pretending that I knew more than I do. So that is something that you should probably research on your own. And unfortunately, in your research, you will find within maybe 4 minutes that you will be looking at pretty complicated calculus equations. And unless you're a mathematician, it's pretty easy to get turned off. It doesn't mean that you should stop searching, but it's pretty difficult to find the answers to that unless you're mathematically minded, right? But I will address that a little bit in a minute, believe it or not. So we back to the shawm. So this will lead up to saxophones, but we have to take just a little trip through history. So we've got a reed instrument with a piece of brass attached to it so that it will carry the sound wave through it. And there's 6 holes on them, right? If you look real close, you can count them. So we've got 6 holes in this tube. And when you cover them...
Which one?
number 3, the bottom left.
Okay, yeah.
Okay? So... your fingers cover the holes. And that's how you lengthen or shorten the resonator. Mechanically, there's not much going on because the contact points are limited to just 6. Finger, contacts, hole, and we're done. Assuming the instrument's been made well, assuming the holes have been put in the right places and the distances are correct, then the next thing we have to worry about is whether or not we're sealing the holes. And assuming the manufacturer of the instrument, the engineer of the instrument did their job, then we're good to go because all I have to do is just make my contact point cover. That's all there is to it. And, mind you, for the rest of this talk, we're going to assume that all the instruments that we refer to were made well. The bore dimensions are correct, the length is correct, and the tone hole placement is correct, which is a very important thing. So, naturally, over time, people are going to start to add keys to the resonators because 6 holes limits our ability to shorten and lengthen the resonator. We can only play so high, and we can't incrementally shorten the resonator in finer and finer divisions to play a chromatic scale. But they didn't just introduce all these keys all at once, it's one at a time. So the next visual aid is instrument number 2 on the same page, the one that's shaped like a big curlicue. So it's called the serpent. I don't know much about the serpent. It doesn't really matter. It's really we're just talking about the keys that we see on it. Now, if you look at the description in the bottom, it says 4-key serpent. We're just going to pretend that the only keys on that instrument are the 2 we can see, because that's really all that's important for this talk, right? So let's pretend it says 2-keyed serpent. So now we have an instrument with 6 holes, and someone's added 2 keys to it. And the key is designed so that I can open or close a hole that my finger could not reach otherwise. So here's the mechanical part of that. With one simple key that's sprung shut, so all I have to do is push it, and it opens, and I let go, and it closes of its own mechanical design. There are 7 contact points that need to be correct in order for that key to function. And I'll spell them out for you. Right? It seems pretty simple. But 7, you say, holy crap, what are you talking about? So the pad has to touch, or whatever material is used to cover that hole, has to make contact with the hole. And it has to do it correctly. The axle on which that key rotates is another contact point. And that has to be correct. On either side of the axle are 2 posts. Maybe the serpent's not designed that way, but it's how a saxophone key is designed, so that's what's relevant. So on either side of the axle are 2 posts, and they need to be correct. If they're loose or wobbly, on a saxophone it's a threaded rod, and there's a threaded end and a head end, and if there's something wrong there, maybe the pad doesn't seal the hole correctly. So we've got pad or material covering the hole, the axle on which the key rotates, and 2 posts. Then, when you open the key, you push it down and it makes contact with the body, which determines how high the key opens, which determines whether or not it sounds correct. So we have another contact point. 2 more contact points. The key is closed by a spring. The spring has to make contact with the body, and it has to slide on the body. And if there's something wrong with the way in which it makes contact with the body, the key might not function correctly. Maybe there's a divot in the body. Maybe there's something wrong with the spring, or it's angled incorrectly. And lastly, the spring needs to be held in place by a screw. So if there's something wrong with the screw, if the thread is loose or it's broken or whatever the case may be, the thing that has to cover the hole might not do its job correctly. So we have 7 contact points that need to be correct, and if any one of them or any combination of them is wrong, maybe that hole is not going to be covered correctly, which means we can no longer manipulate the sound wave the way we want it to. Right? With the instrument beforehand, finger over hole, done. But the serpent, the instrument in question's got 2 keys that are sprung shut. So we have a total of 14 contact points. Of course, as you can see on the front page here, we're not going to talk about this page anymore, but I'll make one brief visit. More and more keys are added, right? A little aside, you can see instrument number 8 is an Adolph Sax bass clarinet. For those of you who don't know, he was responsible for improving the design of the bass clarinet and arguably rescuing it from its inevitable demise. And you can see how many keys are on it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What, you have a question?
So the key's always designed so that pressing the key opens the hole or closes the hole, or
Absolutely not. Right. So the key in question, I started with this key purposefully because it's super simple. Not all the keys are just open, it's called a sprung shut key. and it's a simple system key because it doesn't connect with anything else. So there's no regulation involved, all right?
And that's on like serpent or,
What's that?
is that one on the serpent you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm referring specifically to the serpent, right? So it had, visually, it had two keys that worked unto themselves. So it was a great example to sort of break down how many contact points are involved in it. But we're going to move on to the next one. So you got another question. I doubt it, but I don't know. And I don't really know the answer to your question, but I guess, it doesn't really matter for the purposes of this talk. I highly doubt it was made of metal, but I don't know. And it doesn't change any of the things that I'm saying for this talk specifically, because the talk's really not about the serpent in particular. Is everyone with me? Am I confusing anyone yet? You're all with me? Okay. So if you turn the page, we've got an early clarinet. This one's from 1780. This is a 5-key clarinet. It's got 8 holes put into it, not 6. Now, all the keys on this instrument are sprung shut, just as the one on the serpent, with the exception of the lowest key, which is that. So that answers your question there, sir. That key, you can see, is open, and it's only when you push it's got attached to a long lever. When you push the lever, that key closes. So it's a lever connected to a key. Let's just leave it at that. All right. I'm going to try to keep everything real simple. But the contact points, the way the contact points relate to the key are the same. So we have 5 keys, 7 contact points per key. So we have 35 contact points that are a part of the mechanical design of this instrument, plus 8 holes, right? So that gives us 43 contact points on this clarinet from 1780, right? We're going to get to saxophones real quick here, all right? So that's enough of the clarinet. Now let's turn the page. So the clarinet that we just looked at was from 1780. 60 years later, Adolph Sax invents the saxophone. Now, if anyone's ever seen a picture of a saxophone from that era, while it doesn't look exactly like one of these, it's remarkably similar. Okay? Yes, you can look at it and go, wow, that looks much simpler than this one. But not all that much simpler. The guy had really sort of narrowed it, had figured it out. 100 years later, in 1945, we have the picture that we see here that Kahn took of one of their saxophones at that time. So, now we're talking about an instrument that takes 535 components just to build. These are not the contact points. These are just to make the thing look the way it does. Now, that's pretty, we've come a long way from a piece of, I should add, this is important. Mind you, essentially, we're still just talking about a piece of grass attached to a resonator that when you exert pressure on the grass, the sound wave is channeled through and carried by the resonator. And all of this design and advancement is in the interest of facilitating better and better manipulation of the sound wave. That's what it's all about. And it's still essentially, we're still looking at a piece of grass attached to a resonator, an amplifier. Let's keep that in mind here. So, turn the page. Not everyone's going to have the same image on the next page. Some of you are going to have the image of this saxophone inspection sheet, and some of you aren't. I didn't make all the right number of copies. So if you don't have that next, just look at your neighbor or something, and if you don't have a neighbor who has it, you can always just look over there and see it there. So now, this thing's made of 535 different parts, so it's real good to keep in mind the image that we just saw. And how many contact points are we talking about? So here's a saxophone inspection sheet. Very similar to what you might have used someone might have used, an employee would have to give to their supervisor at a con factory. The saxophone in the image is actually somewhere, but it doesn't matter. So you might have had to assemble one of these, and then you bring the saxophone inspection sheet to your supervisor, and he gets to check off every single one of those items, of which there are 40, right? So there's actually more than 40, but 40 are only relevant to making the instrument play. 40 are only relevant to how many contact points the instrument has. And the code on the bottom has 12 different categories that could be wrong. Only 7 of which I'm going to make it conservative, 7 of which are really critical to making the instrument play. Like, it's got a scratch or a dent, the roller doesn't work. I mean, the thing is you can still kind of get by those. But so you've got 7 categories and 40 items. So you've got a total of 240 contact points that need to be correct, or you might not be able to manipulate the sound wave as well as the instrument was designed to, right? Now, okay, contact points and big numbers and all that, why is that important? If you turn the page, yeah, so you're already on the next page, you can stay right there. So the next page is this one, right? So if the instrument is, the reason having all the contact points in order is important is for one thing. Remember, it's so that the holes will be sealed. With the really simple shawm, you've got 6 holes, cover hole with finger, we're done. On this, we've got a lot more going on. And everything needs to be in order or it's not going to respond correctly. You're going to lose what we see here. And this, so these represent all of the this is the harmonic spectrum that you can hear in individual notes on wind instruments, right? First we've got a simple flute. It doesn't say all this. The text from the book I'm sort of translating. All of it isn't in here. So number 1 is a simple flute. Number 2 is a bone flute. Then we have an oboe, a bassoon, and a clarinet. And these are measured while playing long tones. So when you just play one note on the saxophone, even though you might hear F, because you want to play F, all of these other notes in the harmonic spectrum of that note can be heard, felt, sensed, experienced. You might not be able to describe what it is, but they're there for you to be awash in. And if they're not there, you would know it, right? So, as leaks are introduced into the horn because the holes are not sealing correctly, you can start picking off more and more of the harmonics, more and more of the harmonic spectrum, which means, I should back up just a little bit. Sometimes people say, oh my God, this horn's got so much resonance. This horn's got so much color. What a big sound. That's what this is. That's what you're hearing. When it's a colorful sound, bold, rich, resonant, all these things, it's about how much of the harmonic spectrum you're hearing from all of the notes, which you're going to lose one by one as more and more leaks are introduced. And the way this particular image is supposed to be read is the large white notes are the parts of the harmonic spectrum that you hear most clearly. The small white notes a little less clearly, and the darkened notes are even less clear. But they're all there to be measured and heard. So you hear less and less and less as leaks and leaks are introduced until you get this. Now you guys might not remember because they all look the same, but this is the saxophone I played first, which was very hard for me to play. This saxophone does not work. Okay? However, I did get all the notes out of it. I played every note. If you had come here to hear me play a Bach cello suite, and this was the instrument I chose, you would have left by now. Okay? I wouldn't have been able to play with any nuance because there's no responsiveness in this instrument because it doesn't work. However, since the most crude, most basic way in which the saxophone functions, which is to have a piece of grass attached to the resonator, and when I blow on it, the sound fills the resonator and is translated by the resonator and goes all the way through. You still hear saxophone sounds. And I can push the keys, which means I can change the length of the sound wave, which means I can change the frequencies and I can change the notes, but I can't do it with any nuance. And this is exactly the kind of horn that someone will come to my shop with and say, I got this horn. I've always wanted a busher. These are the best. I'm really into it, and I can play it. And then they say all kinds of things after that, like, it plays, but it's just the low notes. It plays, it's almost all there. Well, it's just the low one. Well, actually, like, when I get to F, it's kind of hard. I mean, some of the keys don't feel right either, but I don't think it's going to be a lot of work. Right? And there's an enormous disconnect here.